colleague Sanjay Puri, Chairman USINPAC, Ravinder Saxena, Director India Affairs, and Vikram Chauhan, our strategic advisor, and my other colleagues. I greet the joiners of this program. For the purpose of smooth operations, we will keep our participants on mute. To submit questions, please use the online chat box or send questions via email to events@usinpac.com. That is events@usinpac.com. Today's topic of discussion is analysis of the first budget presented by the Modi government. Now I invite Sanjay Puri, Chairman USINPAC, to address the joiners of this call. Sanjay.
Thank you, Surbi. Good morning to our listeners in the United States, and good evening or good afternoon to our listeners around the world. In our continuing effort to strengthen ties between the oldest democracy and the largest democracy, we continue our Indian Diaspora Leadership Dialogues. Very topical discussion today. The first budget has been presented by the new government led by Prime Minister Modi, and we are really, I would say, lucky, timely to have two excellent speakers who come from two different segments of the dialogue or the perspective. We have, a corporate person who's written a fantastic book, and we have a political leader. And this is really to continue furthering the dialogue. We welcome questions. We've had tons of questions that have come in, and we hope that you'll keep those coming in. And with that, I'll turn it over now to Surbi to introduce our guests. Surbi?
Thank you, Sanjay. We have two guests today. Mr. Ravi Venkatesan is the first guest, and Mr. N.K. Singh is the second guest today. Mr. Ravi Venkatesan is the former chairman of Microsoft India. He doesn't need much of the introduction, but still, I'll go ahead. He is the founder and chairman of Social Venture Partners India. Mr. Venkatesan was recently appointed to serve on the board of Rockefeller Foundation. Congratulations, Mr. Ravi, on that. He's also on the board of Infosys Limited and Harvard Business School. New York Times review about Mr. Venkatesan says, it's hard to find a more passionate advocate for doing business in India than Mr. Venkatesan, the former chairman of Microsoft India. When Mr. Venkatesan moved to India in 1996 from the United States, he was so sure he would not be here long that he put his belongings in storage. Instead, he spent an 8-year stint as the head of Cummins India, growing the company's engine and generator set business here, and helping Cummins open the country's first engineering college for women in Pune, India. And then he took the top job at Microsoft in India 2004. Despite knowing so little about the information technology that he used to have someone print out his emails for him, and he left in 2011 after helping expand the company's business in India sevenfold to nearly 1 billion. Mr. Venkatesan has written a book about how essential India is for multinational companies and why some do pathetically here. As he puts it, conquering the chaos, win in India, win everywhere, was published last year in the United States by Harvard Business Review Press. And Bill Gates says, Mr. Ravi Venkatesan's clear and candid look at doing business in India should be on the reading list of any business leader who wants to better understand India and other emerging markets. Conquering chaos is insightful and thoroughly readable. So true. With that, I hand it over to my colleague, Mr. Ravinder Saxena, Director of USINPAC India Affairs. Ravinder.
Thank you so much, Surabhi, and once again a hearty welcome to all our listeners and callers who are joining in on this dialogue. Our first speaker, as my colleague Surabhi has introduced, is Mr. Ravi Venkatesan, and he will make his opening remarks for about 10 odd minutes to give an overall perspective on the topic of the day today, which is looking at how the budget which has been presented by the Modi government can be analyzed, or what are different views, especially of experts like Mr. Venkatesan. Without much ado, may I invite Ravi. Please, sir, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone, and good morning. I really appreciate this opportunity to be able to share my views. Let me add, however, that I am not an economist. And so I won't be making any, erudite comments, but rather offering a very practical view of a business person, and that to a person who's written a book about doing business in India. Now, as we all know, Prime Minister Modi was voted to power on the basis of some very, very clear ideas and promises of getting the economy back on track and on making India an easier place to do business, both for Indian and foreign companies. And this first budget is therefore a very important signal of this government's commitment to following through on its electoral promises. Now, it turns out this is one of the longest ever budget speeches by a finance minister, extraordinarily complex within a confusing amount of detail with lots of new proposals. And therefore, it's quite easy to miss the forest for the trees. And a lot of the analysis that has happened in the last 2 days does exactly that. What I'd like to suggest is that there are 4 questions that are really, really important in thinking about this budget. And we should ask ourselves, how well does this budget do in answering those 4 questions? And the first, of course, is fiscal consolidation. How does the finance minister plan to reduce expenditure? How does he plan to attack subsidies and raise money through disinvestment? So the FM has promised to rein in government expenditure, and he's carried forth the previous finance minister's commitment to maintain the deficit at 4.1% of GDP, and then reduce that over the next 2 years to 3.6 and then 3%. And there's not a lot of detail here, but he's appointed a high-level expenditure management commission to really focus on curbing spending. Now, the intent is clear. Details will obviously unfold over time. Now, he's also set a rather ambitious target of raising somewhere between $11 and $13 billion, depending on the exchange rate, through disinvestment. This is a fairly ambitious target. And there's a particular focus on the government-owned banks, which have to recapitalize themselves by raising $40 billion by 2018. Now, this is ambitious, but fortunately the stock market is booming, and I personally believe that there's a reasonable chance that these targets may be achieved. Now, on subsidies, however, a whole different game. There's disappointing little detail in terms of how this government is going to rein in the nearly $43 billion subsidy regime. Now, $43 billion accounts for nearly 14% of all expenditure. And there aren't many specifics. There are sort of words that say we're going to overhaul the subsidy regime, including food and petroleum subsidies, make it more targeted, while still providing full protection to marginalized and poor people. So at this point, it feels more like motherhood, but hopefully that'll become sharper over time. So overall, these feel pretty much like directionally correct measures, but in the face of extremely harsh economic situation and fairly weak execution capabilities, this restraining the deficit to 4.1% this year may be ambitious, and I think sort of people in the know who I tend to trust say it's more likely to be about 4.5%. Now, the second big question is, hey, what does the budget do in terms of making progress towards shifting to a much more open economy and making India an easier place to do business? Now, I think that's fundamentally about 2 things, taxation and FDI. Now, going into this budget, the single biggest expectation that the world had was that the finance minister would repeal this retrospective amendment of tax laws on indirect transfers. That's that famous Vodafone case.
True.
Now, the FM, while he provided assurance on creating a stable and predictable tax regime, and then he set up a high-level committee to deal with future issues. On the Vodafone matter itself, he was conspicuously silent, I think preferring to let arbitration take its course. Now, there's all sort of pragmatism underlying this, but I think he lost the opportunity to send an unambiguous signal that foreign businesses were really looking for. However, he also proposed to make important changes to transfer pricing laws and make them more consistent with international practices, and that should, I think, be highly appreciated by companies ranging from GE to Microsoft and IBM. On continuing on taxes, I think there was there were statements made on the much-awaited tax reforms, particularly GST, the goods and services tax, but there wasn't much concrete out there. On GST, the FM basically said, hey, the government is ready to approve a legislative scheme to enable the introduction of GST. But he didn't really address either the time frame in which this would happen or the concerns of the states, particularly around revenue loss. And therefore, it still remains a bit ambiguous. Now, on FDI, there was some real positive moment. He basically said we're opening up FDI in commerce and, of course, up the cap on FDI in defense and insurance from 26% to 49%. Now, while that's good news, I wonder whether that will go far enough. I wonder whether companies like Boeing and Lockheed will be ready to transfer high technology if they don't control 51% of their Indian subsidiaries. But time will tell, and maybe this can happen in 2 steps. So question number 3 for me, which is really important in thinking about this budget, is what is the government going to do to improve India's dreadful infrastructure? And there I think the FM did a pretty good job. Even though the news was, spread all across the budget, he's basically committed very large allocations to infrastructure. Over $6 billion for building 8,500 kilometers of new roads, fuel guarantees for thermal power plants, a commitment to develop new airports in smaller cities, 16 new ports, doubling the size of the gas grid by 15,000 kilometers and so on. So that's good. But even more importantly, what he's done is propose many ideas to create a better policy framework for the execution of projects so that the private sector would finally be attracted to invest here. For instance, he says, let's create an e-biz platform that brings much more transparency and accountability into the process of getting all the clearances such as land acquisition, environmental clearances, etc. The other thing which I think he's really focused well on is the funding for infrastructure projects. On one hand, he's encouraged banks to extend long-term loans to infrastructure projects. They said they'll be now permitted to raise long-term funds with minimum regulatory interference. And then he's also announced infrastructure investment trust, similar to REITs, the real estate investment trust, hoping that that'll also get more equity into these projects. So I give pretty reasonable marks for the emphasis on infrastructure. The fourth and final question for me is, how does the government intend to create a vibrant manufacturing sector? This is a huge deal for India. Every year we have about somewhere between 12 and 15 million people entering the workforce age, but we've been creating only 2 to 3 million jobs every year. So we've absolutely got to get this manufacturing engine running. Now, I think the biggest impact in this budget is going to be felt over time through the implementation of GST on one hand and through the improvements in infrastructure on the other hand. The infrastructure projects, as they kick in later this year, should demand, trigger a healthy demand for construction machinery, for cement, for steel, and so on. And in addition, as the defense production gets localized by the raising of the FDI caps. Now, there's also some increased customs duty on certain electronic products, so that might encourage some companies to produce locally instead of bringing them in from China or wherever. These things will help. So, again, directionally right, but, not necessarily a whole lot just yet. Now, many people have been quite critical of this budget. They've been disappointed, saying it's incremental and doesn't go far enough, particularly given such a strong mandate that this government had. And, people are also somewhat disappointed by the lack of detail on some areas. To be clear, I'm not one of them. I think this budget is pragmatic and directionally quite good. And most importantly, there's nothing retrograde in this budget. And that in itself is a big deal after the experience of the last few years, which has been fairly traumatic for businesses. Now, Chinese philosopher Lao Tzu said that a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. And I think that's really how we should look at this budget. And in just 7 months from now in February, the government will be presenting another budget, this time for the full year. And they're going to have an opportunity to be clearer and bolder. And, while in India, we get very excited about the budget, almost uniquely so. But
Right.
so much of what needs to be done to revive the economy lies beyond the budget. It lies in legislative reforms and things like labor laws and so forth. It lies in administration. And so while there's this tremendous appetite for a big vision, big pronouncements, what we really, really need to focus on is better execution. And so I think this government, if it's able to avoid, bruising confrontations, even with a diminished opposition, and can actually deliver on what it has said it's going to do in this budget, I think it represents huge progress in an economy that has been crippled with bad ideas, red tape, and empty rhetoric. So with that, let me pause and see if I've stirred the pot enough, and there are a couple of good questions.
Oh yeah, no, thank you so much. I think you run the entire gamut to a very large extent, because several of the questions that we have are kind of touching upon some of the topics which you've already touched, including talking about manufacturing or capacity building of India's manufacturing, and of course other things like retrospective taxation and FDI and all. We'll definitely get into those questions based upon, and I'll once again request our callers and listeners to please keep on sending us your questions via chat or via email. We'll try and take them up with both of our expert speakers. Now, may I invite my colleague Surabhi to please introduce our second eminent speaker of the day, Mr. N.K. Singh. Surabhi, could you please introduce Mr. Singh?
Sure, Ravinder. It's such a pleasure to introduce Mr. N.K. Singh. Mr. Singh is a renowned politician, economist, and a former top bureaucrat. Till recently, he was a member of the Rajya Sabha from the state of Bihar, India. He has served on the Parliamentary Standing Committee on External Affairs and the Committee on Local Area Development, the Public Accountants Committee, the Consultative Committee on Finance, the Committee on Rules, the Housing Committee, and the Parliamentary Forum on Global Warming and Climate Change. Mr. Singh is on the governing bodies of research organizations like Indian Council for Research and International Economics, that is ICR, IER, the International Management Institute, IMI, and the National Institute of Fashion Technology, NIFT. Mr. Singh has a wide range of national and international experience, having interacted closely with multilateral organizations like World Bank, IMF, ADB, UNCTAD, GATT, WTO, UNDP, and OECD. Additionally, he has taken up various international responsibilities in the UN, World Economic Forum, Indian Embassy in Tokyo, IMF, etc. With that, Ravinder, I hand it back to you to proceed with the forum. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you so much, Surabhi. And we welcome Mr. N.K. Singh to this leadership dialogue discussion. Sir, you can please begin with your opening views and comments on the topic of the day, which is an analysis or your perspectives on the first budget of the Modi government, which we have seen over the past couple of days. And then after your opening comments and remarks, which could be 3, 5, 7, 8 minutes, as you wish, then we will get on to the question-answer discussion mode with yourself and our other eminent guest with us, who is Mr. Ravi Venkatesan, the former chairman of Microsoft India. So, sir, may I invite you for your views and thoughts on the topic of the day?
Well, thank you. Thank you for this opportunity to be able to share my views with this very distinguished group of people you have. I agree with the analysis of Ravi. I think it's fairly comprehensive. I want to address just, since he has covered a whole lot of ground, I wouldn't want to repeat what he has said. But I would ask just 3 questions. First and foremost, what does this budget do in terms of catapulting the Indian economy on a forward path? Does it begin to revive growth momentum, and does it give a big push to growth momentum? Now, in answering this question, we must not forget some legacy issues, that this budget came in the backdrop of 2 years of continuing sub 5% rate of growth, the first time that the country experienced this in 25 years, of 2 successive years of the manufacturing sector growing at 0%, and the industrial sector as a whole growing at 0.9%, with inflation raging beyond acceptable levels,
and a decade of jobless growth.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we must, this is the difficult situation in which this budget had to be crafted. As Ravi rightly said, this is not a full year budget because 4 or 5 months have gone, and I think that very soon exercise will begin after the passage of this finance bill for the real first budget of Mr. Jaitley to be presented in February or so. Two other exogenous variables complicated life for the finance minister: the uncertainties created by the monsoon and the extent to which this would create a new set of expenditure burdens, and the difficulty in managing not only food security, we have fortunately enough supplies of food grains, but in terms of sustaining farm income. The other, of course, is the geopolitical implications of the Iraq situation and the possible spike in oil prices. Now, in the context of this, what I think Mr. Jaitley has achieved rather cleverly and rather imaginatively is he has certainly kick-started the virtuous circle between savings and investment for the reasons that Ravi articulated, taking a very difficult fiscal consolidation target, accepting that particular challenge, and of course continuing with that effort. On the subsidy rationalization, a lot of rationalization has actually begun, because on petrol, for instance, we are already on the import parity price. On diesel, there is a very small subsidy now because the correction is taking place automatically. And I think that as subsidy rationalization proceeds further, which will include really fertilizers, the Expenditure Management Commission, which Mr. Jaitley has promised is going to do a major part in bringing about a comprehensive plan for subsidy rationalization. I expect that, therefore, they will be under strain, but a lot would, of course, depend on how quickly growth revives itself. I mean, if the growth revives itself quickly, as the economic survey points out, that to 5.4 to 5.9% in the current fiscal year itself, or even and going forward somewhat better, then of course tax buoyancies improve, and then reaching this difficult fiscal consolidation target, which he has accepted for himself, helped greatly by a massive disinvestment program, for which there is a significant appetite looking at the bond conditions in the stock market. I think that the fiscal consolidation targets will be achieved, which means that, by and large, the crowding out effect and crowding out private investment would have been contained in virtuous circles on between growth, savings, and investment created. The second question is, has it reversed expectations? Will investors feel more confident? Now, I know this vexed issue of the retrospective taxation, but in terms of the legislative rubric of India, since Parliament's sovereign right to make laws prospectively and retrospectively cannot be taken away, the best that he could do is make a commitment that in future he will not resort to retrospective taxation. And on the subsisting issues which have arisen on account of past action, a firm commitment to try and get them resolved through alternative dispute settlement mechanism, including on arbitration. But there's a whole lot of other things in terms of transfer pricing, in terms of raising the cap on FDIs, in terms of making the tax regime far less adversarial, in terms of a more friendly consultative mechanism as far as the modernization of the taxation is concerned. I think a slew of measures which I think that would substantially bring investor confidence back. On the infrastructure, the issue of stranded assets, and I think that Ravi has dealt with that at some length. I totally share his views that the stranded assets today represent 8 lakh crores stranded in the system. And I think an expeditious disposal of some of the disputes which have arisen, regulatory hurdles which have come, environmental clearances, disputes with other regulators, disputes of various kinds, resolving them through a fast-track mechanism would make an enormous difference into building the virtuous circle between vastly improved infrastructure. There are a whole lot of other things, I think, which this budget contains, which are nuggets in the budget. For instance, the impetus given to creation of new smart cities, the process of urbanization being fostered, the modernization of agriculture, for instance, in terms of improved warehousing, improved rural roads, improving the shelf life of products, improving farm incomes, improving the access to rural credit by increasing the credit subvention, setting up ambitious targets for banks to be able to do so. And finally, I would say that quantum change in the efficiency of the quality of financial intermediation, which is contained in this budget, encouraging banks for the recapitalization to meet the daunting Basel III norms which you have accepted, to increasingly go to the market to be able to raise resources, which would mean, of course, greater accountability. On the whole, given the constraints and given the fact that this is at best a half-year budget, I think it has made a decisive change, in my view, on expectations and a decisive change in putting India's growth trajectory back on track. I'll stop here.
Thank you so much, sir. I think that's been a fantastic overview, and especially I think interesting because we have two experts, one looking maybe more from corporate and leadership and entrepreneurship perspective, and the other leader we have looking more from policy and overall even governance perspective perhaps, and what you mentioned in terms of as to what the trajectory the budget is setting the country towards, that is the key and the direction. But yes, definitely, there have been, the comments or the reaction to the budget which we have been seeing in the media, and I think several of our callers or, readers in the US or in the diaspora, they are finding that the response oftentimes which we are seeing reads that it's like a lukewarm response to the budget. So it's very heartening, I think, to hear a very clear-cut, as we go into the longer-term picture of the country. We'll come to you questions for you, sir, because we are getting questions on chat, and there are questions which have already come to us specifically asking your views. But first now I'll have a question for Mr. Ravi Venkatesan. Ravi, you've written your book, This Conquering Chaos and Win in India, Win Everywhere, where you say that companies need to look to a long-term plan or a commitment to India. If they're looking for a short duration, quick results, they might as well not come to India. Do you think that this budget which has come up or has been, or the trajectory which we are seeing in India, will be now more attractive to foreign corporations to come in for the longer term in India?
No, it's a great question. I have been in India now for 20 years, so I've seen ups and downs. And everything in my experience and intuition tells me that we're heading into a period of at least 5 years of good, if not really good growth, okay? And that's a window of opportunity that companies, US companies, should absolutely not miss out on. I actually go even further. I've gone out so far as to say, if that this Modi government just does a few things right, India can be the next China. Let me explain. I think companies are experiencing a lot of headwinds in China. You're seeing a slowing economy, you're seeing rapidly rising wage and other costs, and also they're facing a lot more hostility. And so many companies are beginning to think about, hey, how do we diversify our risk? At this point, if we are able to put a welcome mat out that says, we're open for business, really would love to have companies come and invest here, we reduce the amount of friction and headwinds that they face in the country, we could see quite a tidal wave of investment. So I really do feel that this is likely to be a once in a very long time window of opportunity that companies must not lose out on. And so far it's the Japanese who are jumping in decisively with both feet. Part of it is explicable because of the frictions between China and Japan, and therefore they're taking to India rather fast. But I would hope that American companies are not far behind and they leave the skepticism which was born of the last 2 or 3 years of fairly traumatic experience behind.
Great. Thank you so much. There's a quick follow-up question on that before I pick up the next question with Mr. Singh. This question is coming to us on chat via Arvind Amin. The question is, in fact, Ravi, this would be something we'll get deeper into it a bit later in the conversation, I think, regarding manufacturing and innovation in India. But without getting into that detailed question right now, the question the gentleman is asking, are there any opportunities for NRIs, quote unquote, to make financial investments in the manufacturing sectors, particularly for small investors who believe in providing seed funding? What would be your views on that?
Well, I would think that if you're going to operate from the U.S. And be more passive, then obviously the best route is, most obvious route is through the stock market itself. If you're going to be a more active investor, then you need to be prepared to spend substantial time on the ground. And there are some real jewels out there, which are not the big companies which everybody knows, like the Tatas or and so forth, but small and medium businesses that have huge potential with just a little bit of capital and a healthy improvement in management. So it depends on your appetite and whether you're willing to roll up your sleeves and be on the ground and do the due diligence and be more engaged with your investment. But I would think there's both kinds of opportunity right now.
Excellent, sir. Thank you so much. We'll come to a question which had come to us earlier, which is talking more specifically on manufacturing and boosting innovation in India, but that be a separate question a bit later. My question to Mr. Singh now, sir, is that we've read some comments in the media and all which say that the BJP not having a majority in the upper house of the parliament in the Rajya Sabha may be a small handicap for the Modi government. How, what is your reading on this, that how much of a handicap would not having a majority in the Rajya Sabha affect the implementation of this trajectory that we are looking? And of course, we understand in the next 6-9 months, 1 year, the Rajya Sabha composition would definitely also change. But in the next 6 to 9 months, what is your assessment? What are your views on that, sir?
Let me make 2 points, I think, just to clarify. First and foremost, yes, it is that the NDA government does not have a clear majority in the Rajya Sabha, which it decisively has in the Lok Sabha. But all money bills which require only the approval of the lower house. The budget is defined as a money bill. The insurance law and the pension law would come under the ambit of the definition of a money bill. All those which classify as a money bill does not require the ratification and approval of the upper house. This therefore protects the government for a whole range of actions which are related to the current proposals which are contained in the budget. Second, there are a whole lot of administrative measures which this budget has indicated, and these administrative measures, of course, do not require legislative changes, but they have to be just implemented by the executive, and therefore that handicap would not exist. Third, and I think that I'm quite sanguine on this, that there is enough groundswell of opinion among regional and other parties and among the announced and not announced allied partners, the BJP, that on important policy issues, the Rajya Sabha would not like to really stand in the way of a proposal designed to improve India's growth trajectory. I think that most parties would like to cooperate, particularly the earlier period of a government which has received such a massive majority in the recent election, to block any critical legislation which would be crucial for India's growth. And finally, I think that on many of these proposals had been in the works for quite some time. For instance, on the insurance, the Congress itself was very keen to raise the insurance cap from 26 to 49%. The idea of the defense sector, they were keen to do so. On the pension sector, where the pension law passed by the last parliament was that whatever is the cap in respect of insurance would be automatically applicable to the pension sector, would mean that when the insurance cap gets somewhat raised, this would apply also to the pension sector. So I think finally I would say that yes, this would all have to be negotiated a bit, but I do not see the disability in the Rajya Sabha having a crippling impact on the kind of growth trajectory which we have discussed.
Excellent, sir. Thank you so much. I think it reminds some of us of our civic studies in class 10 about the money bill and the role of the lower house, and that they have the primacy in that. There's a follow-up question on that which I'll take with you, sir, and before I go to Ravi for the next question. The question for you, sir, Mr. Singh, is India's infrastructure needs or funding needs for infrastructure are estimated anywhere from 1 trillion to 1.5 trillion over the next 5 years, according to any estimates. Now, assuming a 70-30 debt equity ratio in normal projects, that means around, if 1 trillion, that means around 700 billion of equity money and, debt money, and about 300 billion of equity money. And India's credit ratings that we are seeing right now, in fact, there's a certain dip in some of the ratings, I think, the past couple of days. So how do we see, or how do you see India raising the debt component, because maybe that's the larger component, equity could come in a certain PPP form. So how do you see the funding or accomplishing this funding for the needs of the country's infrastructure?
Well, I would say that I have 3 brief comments to make. First, I think that in this budget, for the funding of the infrastructure, the flexibility which has been given to the banks to access the statutory liquidity ratio and the cash reserve ratio preempted by the Reserve Bank of India improves the liquidity conditions of many of these banks. So I think that that's one leeway. The second, of course, is that a lot of the banks' liquidity is locked up in what I have called earlier as the stranded assets, because 8 lakh crore projects are in the pipeline, stuck due to one reason or the other. And as the system moves forward and these projects get unlocked, not only the projects will get implemented, but the liquidity of the banks and the balance sheets of the banks will get dramatically improved to be able to make fresh lending. My third comment really is that the improved access to foreign investment which has been given will hopefully see significant inward capital flows. Fourthly, because of the new model of public-private partnership, and on which the government, for purposes of infrastructure, has placed a great reliance on, and being able to resolve the contractual and other issues which have bedeviled public-private partnership in the past, will hopefully see a lot of private capital, both domestic and foreign, helping in the financing of this huge infrastructure which you have mentioned.
Great, sir. Thank you so much. I think a very, very profound perspective. Now, I'll have a couple of questions interlinked for Mr. Venkatesan. Ravi, sir, one of the main focus, of course, for any government, and this particular government always, is jobs. Now, on jobs, there are 2 perspectives on which we have questions for you, sir. One is regarding the IT sector, which has been an engine of growth in India and has definitely contributed significantly to the economy. So, from the IT industry perspective, if you were to look at this budget, would you have some specific thoughts with respect to the IT sector per se? Both domestic and IT sectors globalized business.
Yeah, my own reactions with an IT hat is this is not a hugely impactful budget either way. I think on taxation there is some good news in the form of this advanced ruling, which is going to be made available to domestic firms as well. So I think that will be good. But overall, it's marginal. However, I would say that the IT sector, which has been a tremendous engine for job creation for the last 15 years or 20 years, may not be as successful in creating net new jobs going forward because of the tremendous increases in productivity that is going to happen through software-driven automation. Basically, machines doing the work of, that low-end work that people used to do. So I think we would not necessarily see the same trajectory in terms of job creation. But overall, the revenues and profits should be okay. Job growth may lag. Did I answer your question?
Very interesting. Yes, sir, it does answer, definitely, but a very interesting answer. I think very an answer with a foresight, I think, and the gentleman who asked us the question would much kind of appreciate, I think. Linked to, again, the question of jobs, the second component is in the manufacturing sector, and I think that, in your book also you've talked about innovation in the manufacturing sectors in terms of, localization of affordable technologies. Now, once again, looking at maybe partly from the view of this budget or partly otherwise, what is your view on the manufacturing sector in India, its growth, and what can the government be doing more or is not doing enough, or how is it shaping up? Innovation and manufacturing and jobs.
So, a great question. I think India has some tremendous natural advantages when it comes to manufacturing. I used to be the CEO of one of the really large manufacturing companies which made engines and diesel generator sets. And not only did we find at Cummins find India a good market, we used India as an export base, and we could drop engines, 50-liter to
Hello. Hello.
has eroded quite a bit. Hello?
Hello. Are we all there, please?
Yes. I'm here.
Yeah, please continue. I'm sorry.
So
for a moment we thought, yes.
Yeah, so as I said, somewhere in the last few years, our manufacturing competitiveness has eroded. And it's for various reasons ranging from, harassment by tax authorities to tremendous, bureaucratic red tape, lack of decisions, lack of, absence of power, infrastructure issues, labor laws, etc. And therefore, we've seen India's manufacturing output begin to slow down, lots of imports of everything. I think this government has both an obligation and an opportunity to reestablish India's manufacturing competitiveness. And I would say infrastructure is a huge, huge deal there. I would say that the labor law reforms are important. They're difficult, but Rajasthan seems to be a pilot case in showing what could be done. So I'm quite optimistic. India has a huge advantage in frugal innovation, i.e. we may not invent products that are new to the world like Valley, but we're extremely good at making things that are affordable. And so I cite the example of a UK-based construction equipment company called JCB, which makes excavators and backhoe loaders, etc. Not only have they done extremely well in India, today India, exports, or India accounts for more than 50% of their global profits. It's a huge export base, etc. You look at people like Maruti Suzuki, Ford, Hyundai, they're successfully exporting cars out of India. So I think we can become a great manufacturing nation. We may not catch up with China, but we can certainly absorb a lot of the work that will be leaving China because of their eroding competitiveness.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I think an interesting answer, and we'll go deeper into it in the few more minutes or so, the time that we have ahead also. I now move to a question with Mr. Singh. Sir, one of these sectors for, I think, urgent attention or focus of the Modi government is also, of course, cleanliness, including infrastructure and Ganga cleaning that we've been hearing about. And Finance Minister Jaitley also announced in the budget that the government would be looking at seeking NRI funds, quote-unquote funds, for some Ganga infrastructure development or Ganga cleanup. We don't know exactly what all it would mean or imply. Now, what are your thoughts on that, and how do you think the government would be looking at, sourcing or tapping the global Indian diaspora and their goodwill towards infrastructure / Ganga projects in the country, sir?
The Prime Minister, Mr. Modi, has been quite a bit focused on what the diaspora community can do. In fact, in a number of his speeches which he made during the election campaign, he spoke of the huge contribution which the diaspora community can make to India's economic development. And the cleaning of India's river, of which Ganga is the most notable example, which have been stalled and earlier attempts not gone very far, is the beginning of a huge national rejuvenation of cities and of rivers. Because, for instance, when it comes to cities, apart from the large number of new cities which have been mentioned to be able to take care of the demographic dividend and the inevitable transition from agricultural and agro activities to non-farm activities, there is the need to build these new cities, but not at the expense of neglecting old cities to die. So the heritage of the older cities, the preservation of it, and the rejuvenation of cities which have begun to die, the rejuvenation of rivers which are embedded in the Indian psyche, is really a huge national endeavor. And the contribution of the Indian diaspora community, which is linked to the Indian psyche in terms of these cities, these rivers, and these places, would be hugely welcome. And as the months go by, government would articulate the vehicles or the manners and modalities in which such a contribution can be meaningfully made.
Excellent. So thank you so much. That's very interesting to know, I think, for a couple of reasons. One, of course, we've got questions on this particular thing, and several of our members of the US India Political Action Committee have been writing to us and, just wanting to discuss as to what may be the next steps on this, because we do see, of course, all of us also, but we see many others, with this upsurge of kind of maybe connecting back to India in this time in history, and especially contributing to rejuvenation, as you say, of our water bodies and lands, cleaner lands and cleaner water. So maybe that be something on which some of our colleagues who want to connect may connect with you sometime later, sir. But a follow-up quick question here, if you could probably give us a short answer to that, and then because we have a few more questions back and forth, is that there is an issue of non-performing assets in the banking system of India. Now, how do you see that kind of, improving, or how do you see the situation improving? Because some reports have been saying that it's like a ticking time bomb of some sorts also. So how do you see this government addressing that issue? Because that will have a major impact on several things, So your thoughts, sir, please.
The principal reason why these non-performing assets have arisen is because the banks are over-leveraged and overexposed to infrastructure and other sectors where the portfolios have not performed. That, as I mentioned, is the sum and substance of 8 lakh crore projects which are stuck. Now, what are these projects? They are in roads, they are in power, they are in telecom, they are tied up in knots of various kinds. And once these knots and these Gordian knots are cut, you will see an improvement in the balance sheets of the bank and the total non-performing portfolios of the banks coming down. But during the transition, clearly, as a result of these non-performing assets and adherence to the Basel III norms, which we have accepted, these banks would require recapitalization, for which Mr. Jaitley has said that apart from whatever government can do in terms of recapitalization, the banks would be encouraged to access the market, which would improve the quality of financial intermediation and the efficiency of financial intermediation, and to raise the resources and increase their equity by accessing the market borrowing.
Excellent, so thank you so much. And of course, I do realize that you in your opening remarks had also mentioned about these aspects in the Basel III norms. So I hope that answers the question for one of our listeners who sent us this question, I think, a couple of days ago. I have now a question for Mr. Venkatesan, Ravi, and this follows up on my question with Mr. N.K. Singh just now. The question is linked to, and of course you're of course involved, as Surabhi has told our listeners, in venture or social philanthropy. Now, in this perspective, how do you see this sector growing, and especially like even the discussion on Ganga or the cleaning of Ganga and sanitation and all? How do you think social ventures or social venture philanthropy is poised at this juncture in India's history at this point of time, sir?
but with a real business model, is one of the most exciting things that's going on in India. And India, along with the United States, is right at the top or right in the front of all nations when it comes to the growth of such enterprises. So, every one of the challenges that we face almost is also an opportunity for a business. So, for instance, the large number of our villages don't have access to electricity, and many years before they reach there. And so, the Rockefeller Foundation is funding a very major project to create distributed solar systems, where with a real economic model. So this is not just a grant, but actually an investment. So, you might put up 25 kilowatts of power. The cell tower uses a few kilowatts, and then the rest is available for homes and small businesses in that cluster of villages. If you don't have toilets, pay-per-use toilets is an opportunity. I have created this fund, which is one of the most active investors in the social impact space. And we've made quite a few investments in companies that are delivering low-cost healthcare, companies that are, providing educational outcomes, literacy, vocational skilling, and so forth. So I think there are extraordinarily large opportunities. The funding is increasingly available, both the early stage as well as growth stage. What we really need to see more of is good entrepreneurs, seasoned entrepreneurs who are willing to not just start the next internet business, the next software company, but also willing to turn their IQ and energy towards these kinds of challenges. And we're beginning to see more of them.
Excellent. So thank you so much. And I think in this budget, the finance minister has also announced a budget, I think, for 10,000 crores, which is probably around, let's say, $2 billion to promote entrepreneurship in the country. So we do hope that some of that definitely gets into the social impact sectors. Now,
yeah, we're really excited about that and trying to figure out, how it's going to manifest. But it's tremendously exciting to see that. By the way, I should add that India is unique amongst countries in also mandating that companies beyond a certain size have a corporate social responsibility, and they are all highly encouraged to put away 2% of their pre-tax profits towards, social good. So I think we've got a second stream of money that's beginning to flow in, somewhere around $20 billion a year, if all companies actually discharge their obligations. So yeah, the money is not going to be the issue, neither is the opportunity. It's going to be entrepreneurs that are in short supply.
Great. Thank you so much, sir. And now may I invite my colleague and chairman of US India Political Action Committee, Sanjay Puri, to take over the discussion and wrap up, and a few questions with both of our eminent speakers, I think, who've given us a fantastic overview. It's been a fantastic session. Thank you, sirs, from my side. And now may I hand over the floor to Sanjay. All yours, sir.
Thank you, Ravinder. Like you said, very insightful comments from two different perspectives. So let me just quickly ask Mr. Singh a quick question. Mr. Singh, you have had a very distinguished career and you served on the Planning Commission. In the United States, obviously, people don't understand what the purpose of a Planning Commission is. Now, from what we read, and this is a question that has come several times during our sessions, that they say that they might be rid of the Planning Commission or might become irrelevant. What is your perspective on the need of the Planning Commission and what the future is for the Planning Commission? Our listeners in the United States really would like to know that.
Well, first I think that let me explain the U.S.-India difference. In the U.S., the closest you get to the Planning Commission is the Office of Management and Budget, which everybody understands is a powerful entity under a cabinet minister directly reporting to the president, which manages and determines all public expenditure in the United States. The counterpart of that, of course, in India has historically been the Planning Commission, which, although a non-statutory body, primarily has had three functions. One is from out of the gross budgetary support, what it is called the amount which is given every year in the budget to the Planning Commission. It allocates these funds to different ministries of the central government. Second, it also allocates funds apart from the devolution which comes from the Finance Commission to various state governments for what is known as centrally sponsored projects. And thirdly, it acts as an interlocutor between the center and the states on some important issues. Now, clearly, I think that the Planning Commission has, in its present form, had outlived its utility, and this needs to be fundamentally reformed as India has moved away from the concept of central planning into where government is increasingly a facilitator and with increased market liberalization. So I think that the restructuring of the Planning Commission must be really that it must increasingly become a think tank instead of a control kind of an agency, which is reminiscent of the days of centrally planned economy, and that it must increasingly become a facilitator for economic reforms. For instance, China, which had this, is that in China the Planning Commission is now called the Commission for Economic Reforms and Planning. So I think that that's the direction in which there is a growing consensus on which the Prime Minister will take a final decision.
Thank you very much. Ravi, do you have a brief retort to that question that comes in all the time from the U.S.?
Well, I couldn't agree more. I thought his answer was exactly right on.
Okay. Ravi, let me ask you a question. In your book, you talk about, coming into India, and we've been, working on bringing businesses into India for the past 12 years. We brought 26 delegations. Obviously, the past 3 years have been very, very hard in trying to explain to American companies why they should come to India. And, when they look at the charts of the difficulty of doing business, India ranks worse than, I think, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and some of these other countries.
And Yemen.
And Yemen. Having said all of that, and I've heard this drumbeat about manufacturing, and I heard you that we have some strategic advantages. Now, you've got to understand that there are countries like Vietnam and others also. India is, we all think India has got some key advantage, but India is not the only game in town. Now,
sure.
Given our discussions with American companies, in planning for Mr. Modi's visit, we got lined up some of the largest manufacturing CEOs, private equity companies, to have a discussion with him. What are when we go in front of these CEOs, if you were to give us some talking points, why they should come to India, give me or give us 5 talking points, because our listeners also who are CEOs of companies, etc., right now are responding to the chat. Just give us 4 or 5 bullet points why they should come to India.
I'll give you just 3.
Okay.
First of all, it's just the size. It is a $2 trillion economy, which even if it's just growing 6%, is quite a substantial amount. And we've also got 1.2 billion consumers who are growing steadily, if slowly, wealthier. And so, if you're a consumer product company, sorry?
So you said size is point number 1.
Yeah, so size is 1, and also, development happens not in some smooth, linear way, but in spurts. And we appear to be at the beginning of a spurt of growth of, who knows, 5 years, 10 years, whatever. So it's super important to get in there. The second reason is exactly the reasons, exactly the chaos of India. I use the word chaos as shorthand for all these things that make life difficult, right? Tax harassment, bureaucratic red tape, policy uncertainty, crappy infrastructure, all that sort of stuff. And the point I really want people to understand is this is true of all emerging markets. It's absolutely true of India, but all these things are defining features of all emerging markets. And so you can't go to Vietnam, Indonesia, Nigeria, any place and think you can escape these factors. And so learning to cope with chaos, learning to deal with corruption is a core competence that global companies have to develop. And India is one of the best places to actually figure it out, because at least at the end of the day, there's a big market. So learn to deal with chaos here and you'll succeed everywhere. And the third big reason is innovation. I talked about it earlier. I think India is uniquely good at frugal innovation. Hey, we're about to put a probe on Mars for about 1/10 the cost of any other nation, right? We've all talked about, everybody knows on this call about the $2,500 car, or the fact that GE makes X-ray machines and things like that for $400 fraction. So I think if you want to participate in this kind of innovation, which makes things accessible for the next 5 billion people around the world, you cannot not be in India. So I would say these are the three fundamental reasons why companies that want to be global, want to be dominant in their industries, they have to figure out how to succeed here. You can't be global if you're not a leader in China, of course, and in India, and in Indonesia. So, it's really not much of a choice. And people who think they're going to have an easy run in some other emerging market usually end up not doing so well in any market.
Well, very interesting point, Ravi, especially point number 2, which is embracing the chaos. I haven't heard that one. Yeah. We'll use that one too. Mr. Singh, do you have any point to add to this 3 points that Ravi well articulated?
Well, I think that I entirely agree with Ravi. Those are the basic points, although I must say that his second point here, put it rather imaginatively, what visibility he converted that visibility into an advantage. No, I'd just like to add that apart from the size, there is this whole question of the demographic profile and the fact of a vast undersaturation of the basic needs and a long way to go, therefore. Things, given the aspirational nature of this demographic dividend which we have and rapidly falling age dependency ratio, this aspiration will push India. It cannot get any worse. It will only get better, and the sky is the limit, because between now and what could be a saturation point, there will be huge multiplier gains for any company which wants to get in.
So I think those are excellent points, and if we are not violating any intellectual property from both of you, we'll probably use that with some of the CEOs that we are discussing bringing to India. One final point that I would like to ask both of you is, Mr. Modi has talked about the consistently, and obviously with the large Gujarati community historically around the world, he's been very close. Now we saw some of his footprints in this whole Ganga rejuvenation project, but there has not been that big outreach. We thought that there would be a call to the diaspora to help with larger infrastructure needs, or do you think that's maybe going to come later down the need? Because the diaspora has been holding back from investments in India for the past 2-3 years because of the horror stories they heard, and at a given point be ready to support financially with their pocketbooks India's growth story. Anything on that from either of you as we conclude?
Well, personally, I think that Mr. Modi is exceedingly not only favorably disposed, is quite excited about the engagement of the diaspora, whose power and ability to bring in capital and innovation and talent he is consciously aware of. These are early days. I mean, after all, the government has barely been in office for 50 days. Just down the line, this will certainly figure very prominently.
I think our diaspora, much like the Chinese diaspora, is a huge asset. So far, we've relied on them only for remittances, but I think there's an enormous opportunity to tap into their capital, but also their intellectual horsepower and so forth. Everywhere I travel and I meet with the diaspora, I sense a tremendous desire to engage with India and a desire to contribute to things back here. But the conditions have not been favorable. But I'll give you a simple example. We've tried to raise money for our social impact fund. We raised $25 million fairly quickly from a combination of Indian diaspora as well as others. But I think there's a tremendous underleveraged asset out here, and I'm sure Mr. Modi and the government have to be quite smart as the dust settles in tapping into this.
No, I think that's a excellent point. One last point to both of you, that our CEOs and private equity folks, at least some of them have come back saying that they were expecting a more, I wouldn't use the word radical, or they were expecting a little more dramatic budget than they got. Do you think the expectation setting was that's so high that there was some challenges that were not met in terms of the budget? And I know you guys have addressed that this is an interim budget. There's really going to be stuff coming in from 4 or 5 months. So anything on that? Because that's the feedback we're getting, that they were expecting some bigger changes from this budget.
So I think, I put out my views at the outset. I think, that you need to be a little realistic here. This is a government that's been in office for 45 days, for God's sake. Number two, the economic economy they've inherited is a train wreck. And so, what we need right now is not big grand announcements and pronouncements and big bang reforms, but rather, setting a course down in the right direction, and after that, very, very good execution. So what really matters now is that the government execute what it has set out to do in this budget. And then, of course, in the next budget in 7 months, hopefully they can be bolder about things. So I think people who say, hey, I wish we had bigger, grander announcements, I don't know. I just think their expectations are a bit misplaced.
Mr. Singh, any point on that?
I totally agree with what Ravi has said. He has put it, I think, exceedingly well. I agree that managing expectations and aligning expectations with reality is always very challenging. But one of the things Mr. Modi is a great believer in is under-promise and over-perform. So from that point of view, I totally agree that the implementation of number of initiatives with budget contained can make a quantum and a qualitative change, and the key lies in orderly implementation. And Mr. Modi has been known to have a mid-arm with the acumen for implementation, and that's what we should hope, and that's what we expect.
Wonderful. I really thank our two esteemed speakers. I personally have learned from this session, and I'm sure our hundreds and hundreds of viewers who sent in questions have learned, and this session is going to be available on our website. So thank you, Ravi. Thank you, Mr. Singh. I want to also thank our wonderful staff, Dr. Garg, Ravinder Sachdev in India, and all the other volunteers, including Prasad Bomana, our intern, who's been working hard on this. Let me hand it over to Vikram Chauhan for our conclusion of this session. Vikram?
Thank you, Sanjay. So we would like to thank you all for joining us for the session today. And I would like to remind you, please join us again on July 30th, next Saturday, 2 Saturdays from now, same time. And we'll be sending the topic of discussion to you shortly. And may you all have a good rest of the weekend. Thank you all.
Bye-bye.
Bye.